Hey guys, tonight we slip quietly into the soft sandy edges of an ancient Egyptian morning, where the air is still cool enough that you almost believe you could survive a full day here. Light seeps through the cracks of a mud brick wall, pale gold and sleepy, painting tiny geometric beams across the floor where you've been resting on a reed mat that definitely wasn't designed with modern spinal comfort in mind. You hear the muffled bleating of a goat somewhere outside, a pot clinking, a neighbour's hushed voice drifting through the still air as if sound hasn't quite woken up yet. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And because I always love seeing where people are listening from, drop your country and your local time in the comments. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You lie there for a moment longer, half in a dream, half in the dusty glow of dawn, and the reed mat creaks beneath you. The room is small, so small that if you stretch out your legs too enthusiastically, you'll nudge the clay pot your household uses for storing last night's leftover barley mash. It smells faintly of earth, grain, and a hint of something that might once have been onions. That's village life. Everything is slightly fragrant with the memory of a meal. The mud brick walls around you hold onto the coolness of night, but you already sense the heat preparing its attack. The sun is the undefeated champion here. Every day it shows up early, swings hard, and never loses. Historians still argue whether small villages like this woke earlier because of agricultural necessity, or simply because the heat bullied everyone into it. Either way, you're up with the rest of them, blinking against that gentle dawn. You push aside the woven cloth hanging over the doorway, a kind of ancient privacy curtain. Although let's be honest, everyone still hears everything, and step into the small sleeping space shared by your household. No one is surprised to see you awake. Village life is predictable, and the rhythm of dawn isn't something people ignore. This predictability is comforting in a way, like the world saying, yes, today will be exactly as ordinary as the day before, perfect for sleeping content. Outside your small room is the family's main interior area. A grinding stone sits in one corner, already dusted with flour from countless mornings of use. You make a mental note that you'll be taking a turn grinding grain later, and your arms sigh in advance. This counts as your daily workout. You can tell your modern gym friends. A pot of water sits near the wall, capped with a clay lid to keep out sand and the occasional overly curious lizard. You lift it just enough to splash a bit across your face. The water is cool, refreshing, and slightly gritty. But hey, exfoliation is exfoliation. You can hear someone outside, maybe your mother, maybe a sibling, already sweeping the courtyard. Egyptians loved sweeping. Ancient art shows it, texts mention it, and archaeologists keep finding broom remnants that scream, yes, we cleaned constantly. There's a mainstream historical fact for you. Cleanliness mattered, at least in the sense of pushing dust from one corner to another, which is honestly as good as it gets in a desert. A soft breeze flows in through the doorway, carrying the early morning smells of the village. Clay warming in the sun, straw baskets drying after last night's chores, and somewhere, a sheep that is very opinionated about something. A quirky tidbit? Ancient Egyptian villagers sometimes used animal droppings, yes, even crocodile dung, as part of medicinal or cosmetic mixtures. And while you're not wearing any crocodile-based sunscreen this morning, the thought does make you appreciate your unscented modern lotions. You move toward the low doorway that leads outside. Most ancient Egyptian homes had these tiny, almost crouch-required entrances, partly to keep out sandstorms and partly to maintain inner coolness. You duck your head and step through, and instantly the world widens. The dawnlight has strengthened, turning the roofs and walls of nearby homes into warm, glowing shapes. Everything is mud brick, everything is earth-toned, and everything looks as though it grew right out of the ground, which, honestly, it sort of did. The sun catches on bits of straw embedded in the bricks, making them look almost golden. You stretch, feeling the tightness in your shoulders loosen a little. A child runs past, bare feet slapping the dirt, chasing a chicken that clearly wants no part of this. A woman carrying a basket nods at you with sleepy familiarity. No one is in a rush. Morning in a village is like a long yawn before the day fully begins. A dog, a skinny, slightly dusty village dog, pads over and sniffs your ankle with the solemn authority of a security guard making sure you belong here. Apparently satisfied, it moves on. You wonder briefly if this same dog has ever tried to steal drying fish from the roof. Almost certainly. Your stomach rumbles faintly. Breakfast is coming, but not yet. First, you breathe in deeply, letting the air fill your lungs before the heat thickens it later. Life here is simple, predictable, steady. There is hardship, yes, but also routine, community, and the slow comfort of repetition. And right now, as the dawn warms your face, you feel yourself merging into that ancient rhythm, letting it carry you into the day. You step fully into the courtyard, the heart of your small mud brick home, where morning has already settled into its familiar rhythm. The ground beneath your feet is packed earth, smooth in some places, uneven in others where last night's water spilled and left a faint ripple before drying. A broom made of bundled reeds leans against the wall, and someone in your family has clearly given the place a once-over already. In a village this small, dust is basically a full-time resident, and sweeping it is less cleaning and more politely relocating it. You grab the broom anyway, giving the courtyard a few lazy strokes, knowing full well the dust will be back by lunchtime. The courtyard is open to the sky, and the sun is finally bright enough to cast real shadows. A clay oven, your household's little domed taban, sits in one corner. It's still warm from last night's baking, radiating a cozy heat you can feel even from a few steps away. A few pots turned upside down to dry show signs of a quick scrub, and in the centre a woven reed mat lays half-rolled, used for everything from sitting to preparing grain. It is, without exaggeration, the multi-tool of the ancient Egyptian world. Someone hums nearby, your mother perhaps, preparing something in a shallow clay bowl. You move closer and see crushed herbs and a bit of oil mixed into a paste. It's a simple household remedy for insect bites. Mosquitoes love the Nile, and they love you, specifically. That's just the kind of luck you have here. Historians still argue whether villagers use certain aromatic herbs as actual mosquito repellents or more as spiritual protection, but either way, you're grateful for anything that keeps the itch away. You kneel beside the low bench and help smooth the mixture. Your fingers sink into it with a gritty, earthy texture. It smells sharp, almost lemony, and wakes you up a little more. Don't touch your eyes, your mother warns, which you file under, too late to pretend you wouldn't have. A tiny joke slips into your thoughts. Modern bug spray may smell terrible, but at least it doesn't make your eyelids tingle like divine punishment. A rooster crows from the neighbouring courtyard, not gracefully or rhythmically, just a long, dramatic scream, like he's filing a complaint with management. A goat behind that wall answers by stomping loudly, and you wonder whether animals in ancient Egypt had their own morning arguments long before humans got involved. A clay water jar sits in the corner of the courtyard, and this morning you take a moment to pour a little into a dish so the house cat can lap it up. The cat slinks between your ankles, tail held high in regal approval. There's your mainstream historical fact. Ancient Egyptians adored cats. They weren't just pets. They were village pest control, spiritual symbols, and occasionally the only creatures in the home with any real swagger. Your own family cat, a short-haired little creature with sandy fur, pauses long enough to give you a slow blink. Congratulations, you've been deemed worthy. Above you, the rooftop storage area is just visible from where you stand. Many families use their roofs as an extension of the courtyard, drying fish, storing jars, or simply escaping the heat at night. You remember, sleeping up there the night before, warm breeze brushing your face, the stars stretching overhead like chalk scribbles. You were comfortable, until you rolled onto a stray date pit and decided that ancient comfort is 70% vibe, 30% suffering. You move toward a small clay basin set near the wall. It's filled with cleanish water meant for washing hands before the morning tasks begin. You dip your hands in, cupping the coolness, splashing your face again. A quirky tidbit crosses your mind. Some villagers lined their basins with leftover milk residue because they believed it softened the skin. You're not sure about the science, but you've definitely seen smoother elbows on some elders in the village. The courtyard gate, a simple wooden frame door covered with woven reeds, creaks faintly in the breeze. You peer through the gaps and catch sight of the lane outside beginning to stir. Shadows move, voices rise and fall. A few early rising neighbours pass by, one carrying a bucket, another balancing a basket on her hip like she's done it since birth. Honestly, maybe she has. You adjust your simple linen garment, brushing a bit of dust from the hem. It doesn't matter. More dust will find you in precisely 4 seconds. You sigh with the resigned acceptance of someone who knows they'll never win this war. A donkey brays in the distance, long and dramatic, as if announcing that the universe has not provided enough breakfast yet. You feel that deeply. Your stomach grumbles again as you step toward the courtyard's shaded side. The coolness under the small overhang a welcome contrast to the brightening sun. You glance at the grinding stone, at the broom, at the drying jars, at the oven waiting to be relit later, and you breathe in the faint scent of herbs lingering in the air. This courtyard is your world. A tiny, dusty, warm slice of ancient Egypt, filled with chores, smells, sounds, routines, and that morning quiet that wraps around you like a thin blanket. Life is simple here, not easy but steady, predictable, somehow comforting. You take one more breath, brush your palms together to shake off the herb paste, and glance toward the doorway leading out into the village lanes. It's time to step into the world beyond your home. You slip out of the courtyard and into the narrow lane that threads between the mud brick homes like a quiet winding ribbon. The moment your feet hit the packed earth outside your gate, you feel it. Village life moving around you in a dozen small but constant ways. Someone is sweeping, someone is boiling water, someone is already complaining about something. It's the soundtrack of an Egyptian morning, soft, dusty, and mildly chaotic. The lane is barely as wide as your outstretched arms. Mud brick walls rise straight up on both sides, casting slender shadows that help keep the walkway cool for at least a few more blessed minutes. The walls are sun-baked and uneven, with tiny pebbles and stray bits of straw poking, out like freckles. You trail your fingers along one as you walk, feeling the rough, warm texture beneath your skin. A pair of children run past you laughing as they chase a tiny, very stressed chicken. The chicken darts left, they dart left. The chicken darts right, they dart right. You sidestep the chaos with the calm resignation of someone who knows better than to intervene. If ancient Egypt had traffic laws, they would start with, "Yield to chickens, they always win." A woman carrying a pot balanced effortlessly on her head moves past you in the opposite direction. She barely glances down, not because she's ignoring you, but because when you've been balancing jars from childhood, your neck develops the confidence of a professional circus performer. That's your mainstream historical fact. Egyptian villagers, especially women, were masters at transporting heavy loads on foot, often over long distances, developing a posture so straight it would make your modern chiropractor weep with joy. As you continue walking, a soft breeze moves through the lane, stirring up just enough dust to tickle your nose. You sniff, wiggle your face, and sneeze once. A goat 2 houses down hears you and bleats in solidarity because apparently sneezing is a team sport. The lanes twist and turn with no grand design beyond follow the houses and avoid walking into someone's kitchen. The ground slopes subtly, where runoff channels have cut little pathways through the dirt over years of rare but determined rain. The walls on either side hold old fingerprints from when bricks were still wet, human touches preserved across centuries. It gives you a strange feeling of kinship, knowing someone your size once pressed their hand there. A man repairing a fishing net sits on a low stool just outside his doorway, fingers moving deftly through the cords. The net is spread across his knees like an ancient tangled puzzle. He nods at you with the slow, serene acknowledgement of someone who has no interest in rushing anything ever again. As you pass, he mutters something about how the Nile was stingy yesterday and will probably be stingy tomorrow too. Historians still argue whether fishing villages had predictable catch patterns or if they just blame the river for everything, including bad moods. Farther along, the smell of cooking drifts into the lane, bread warming on a flat stone, onions sizzling, maybe even a bit of fish if someone caught something extra yesterday. Your stomach perks up like an eager puppy. It's unfair, really. Your brain tells you it's too early for real food, but your nose disagrees aggressively. A curious detail catches your eye. A tiny clay amulet hung beside a doorway, shaped like a hippo. You pause to look at it. It's small, maybe the length of your thumb and painted with faint blue pigment. A quirky but real tidbit. Hippo-shaped charms were sometimes used for protection, despite the actual animals being massive, dangerous, chaos beasts. Ancient Egyptians loved irony that way. You touch the amulet lightly and move on, feeling a little extra protected, unless there's a hippo in the next alley, in which case you're still doomed. A dog trots past you, sleek, alert, long-legged, the exact opposite of the sleepy courtyard cat you saw earlier. Dogs in the village often roamed freely, half pet, half guardian, half, I go wherever I want. It sniffs your ankle, decides you're unthreatening, correct, and moves along. You turn a corner, stepping into a slightly wider stretch of the lane, wide enough for a donkey cart, though currently occupied by a donkey who has chosen to stop, stare at the sun, and reconsider every life choice. You politely edge around him. He does not acknowledge you. He's above such things. As you walk, you can hear murmurs from inside the homes you pass. Low conversations, grinding grain, a baby fussing, someone scolding a child for trying to skip chores. Life happens very close together here. Privacy isn't so much a right as it is a rare luxury, like the one day a month when the wind blows away from your face instead of directly into your nose. You reach a spot where the lane dips slightly, and the walls widen just enough to create a natural gathering point. A few neighbours stand together chatting, discussing the weather, crop predictions, and the usual village speculation, who's getting married, who owes grain to whom, and whether the new batch of beer someone brewed is actually good or if they're all pretending. You nod politely, joining for a moment as the group shifts to greet you. The conversation flows around you like warm water. Then, almost without thinking, your feet move again, carrying you deeper into the lane. There's a purpose to this walk, a destination that matters more than early morning gossip. You feel the faint thrill of it warming your steps. You're heading toward the Nile. You follow the lane as it bends toward the east, and gradually the texture of the village changes. The air grows heavier, cooler, touched with moisture. You feel it before you hear anything. The unmistakable presence of the Nile, that broad, slow-moving lifeline pulling you forward like a quiet magnet. The houses thin out, shadows widen, and the ground under your feet becomes softer. You know you're getting close when the breeze begins to smell faintly of water, mud, and reeds. It's that strangely soothing scent, like a mix of wet earth and ancient history, that tells you you're exactly where every villager must wander at least twice a day. The last stretch of path opens suddenly into a small sloping bank, dotted with footprints, baskets, and the occasional abandoned sandal. The river is right there, shimmering under the morning sun, gentle waves tapping the edge like fingertips drumming on a table. You breathe in deeply, savouring the cool that lingers here long after the village has started to heat up. Other villagers are already gathered at the water, mostly women and older children, each carrying jars or woven baskets. They greet you with nods, half smiles, and that universal early morning expression that says, "We're here because we have to be, not because we love lifting heavy pots." A mainstream historical fact slips into your mind. For countless small Egyptian villages, daily life revolved around fetching water, not just for drinking, but for cooking, laundry, pottery, brewing, and the irrigation of nearby fields. The Nile wasn't just a river, it was basically the world's busiest co-worker. You pick your way down the bank, careful not to step in the mushier spots where yesterday's footprints have trapped pockets of water. One misstep and your foot will sink into mud deep enough to swallow your dignity. You know this from experience. Everyone has a mud story, it's like a rite of passage. Beside you, two teenage boys are splashing each other while pretending to rinse a set of small fish traps. One of them slips, sending a spray of water directly into your leg. He looks horrified for half a second before laughing and offering an apology that is only about 30% sincere. You wave him off. If you come to the river and leave without getting slightly soaked, the Nile gets offended. You crouch near the water's edge, dipping your jar in slowly so it fills without stirring too much silt. The surface ripples, reflecting your face in a wobbly, slightly judgmental way. The Nile always looks like it knows everything you've done, even the embarrassing stuff. Historians still argue whether villagers consistently drank untreated river water or relied more on beer-like brews and settling techniques to make it safer. Either way, you try not to think too hard about what's upstream. As you pull the jar out, droplets fall back into the river with tiny plinks that blend into the soft sounds all around. Clay jars clinking, reeds rustling, water trickling, and the murmured conversation of neighbours discussing last night's dreams. Egyptians loved dream interpretation. To them, a weird dream wasn't just your brain being silly. It was a potential message from the divine. One woman nearby speaks in a hushed voice about a dream where she saw a hippo wearing a necklace, apparently a sign of good fortune. Another shakes her head and says that hippos in dreams mean chaos. A quirky tidbit. Both interpretations existed. It depended on which era, which deity, and frankly, which neighbour you asked. A small boat glides by a few metres from the shore. Nothing fancy, just a wooden skiff with a single fisherman inside. He uses a long pole to guide his way, moving so quietly it's almost eerie. The fisherman glances at the group on the bank, offering a half wave, before focusing again on the reed-filled shallows where fish love to hide. You watch him for a moment as his silhouette drifts peacefully along the water, his shape mirrored in the shimmering surface like a painting. It's calming, almost hypnotic. You stand with your filled jar, letting the weight settle against your hip. Nearby, a young girl scrubs a clay bowl with handfuls of damp sand, the grains grinding against the pottery with a harsh but efficient rhythm. Ancient Egyptian dish soap, 1 part sand, 1 part Nile water, 0 parts mercy. You start your walk back up the bank, passing clusters of villagers chatting about the weather, the harvest, and whether the crocodile someone spotted last week is still lurking nearby. You try not to think about that last one, but the river does have that suspicious calmness that makes you very aware you're not at the top of the food chain. You also remind yourself of that one unsettling but true debate. Some scholars argue that certain villages incorporated crocodiles into local ritual life, while others think the animals were just tolerated neighbours with terrible tempers. Carrying your jar carefully, you step off the bank and back onto the path leading into the village. Behind you, the Nile continues murmuring softly, as if telling you it will be waiting again tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that. You begin the walk home, water sloshing faintly against the sides of your jar, the sun lifting higher, and the village lanes beckoning you back into their warm, dusty embrace. Back in the village lanes, you steady the water jar against your hip, adjusting your grip so it doesn't tilt and splash precious Nile water down your leg. It's heavier than you'd like. Water always is, but you carry it with that stubborn, quiet determination every villager develops early in life. The morning sun is climbing, warming the walls around you, and by the time you duck back into your courtyard, you can already feel the day stretching itself awake. You set the jar down carefully beside the grinding stone, relieved to let your muscles unclench. The courtyard is alive now. Someone tends the small oven, coaxing the embers from last night back into a usable heat, while another family member sorts through baskets of grain. The smell of warming clay and early morning bread is so comforting, it could be a lullaby. If ancient Egypt had a national fragrance, it would be a mix of bread, dust, and determination. You glance at the corner where flat, oval loaves rise under a cloth. These are the backbone of breakfast, dense, simple, and exactly what you'll need to survive whatever scorching nonsense the sun has planned for today. A mainstream historical fact comes to mind. Ancient Egyptian bread often included bits of grit and ground-up chaff from the grain, which slowly wore down people's teeth over a lifetime. You chew carefully these days, knowing each bite is basically a micro-sandpaper treatment. Your stomach reminds you, politely but firmly, that it's time to prepare food. You step toward a shallow tray where a few ingredients sit. Onions, garlic, some leftover beans from last night, and a small pinch of herbs. Breakfast is not a feast. It's a modest but reliable fuel. You peel an onion with practiced ease, even though your eyes sting instantly. The cat watches, judging your weakness. You want to tell it that onions are rude, regardless of species, but you let it go. You crush the beans with a clay pestle, working them into a thick spread. The texture is dense and slightly coarse, but the smell is warm and earthy. Someone hands you a small pot of oil, your family's carefully rationed supply. You drizzle just a little. Ancient village cooking is basically the Olympic sport of making 5 ingredients feel like 20. The oven is ready, glowing softly inside. You place a flat loaf on a stone slab beside it to warm, watching its surface tighten and crisp just slightly. Someone cracks a joke about how you always manage to burn bread, which is vicious slander because you've only burned it most of the time. You toss a sarcastic remark back, and a tiny ripple of laughter moves through the courtyard. Humour Even dry desert humour goes a long way around here. As you tear off a piece of warm bread and spread the bean mixture over it, a quirky tidbit pops into your head. Some villages' flavoured foods with tiny dried fish, yes, whole fish, ground into powder for saltiness and depth. Breakfast with surprise fish sprinkles is one of those things you never quite get used to. Thankfully, today's meal is fish-free, which makes your morning feel like a small victory. You settle on the reed mat to eat, the bread warm against your fingers. A family member sits beside you, dipping their own bread into the beans. The courtyard buzzes softly with conversation, plans for the day, worries about the weather, and someone mentioning a rumour that a travelling potter will pass through the village soon. Historians still argue whether itinerant craftspeople moved on fixed routes or were more free-spirited wanderers, following opportunities. Either way, a visiting potter means possible repairs or new jars, and in a village where jars are the MVPs of daily life, that's basically a festival. As you finish eating, you lie back for a moment, letting the cool shadow of the wall fall across your face. You listen to the sounds around you. A donkey braying somewhere in the distance, the rhythmic grinding of grain, the faint splash of someone rinsing a bowl. The sun is climbing quickly now, but for a few more minutes the courtyard holds on to the last softness of morning. The cat curls beside you, pretending it's using you for your shade, and not because it secretly likes your company. A neighbour walking past the gate calls out a greeting, reminding everyone that the irrigation channels will need checking soon. A groan rises collectively from your family, because nothing says good morning like the promise of mud, mosquitoes, and more mud. You push yourself upright, brushing crumbs from your linen tunic. Breakfast is done, the day is settling into place. You know what comes next: the fields, the heat, the long hours under the open sky. You exhale slowly, letting the moment linger. Then you stand, stretch your shoulders, and head toward the courtyard gate, ready to step back into the dusty lanes and face whatever the village demands of you next. You step back into the narrow lane, but this time you're not drifting aimlessly. You're moving with purpose, following the well-worn path that leads out toward the fields. The jar from earlier is now tucked safely in the courtyard. Breakfast has settled comfortably in your stomach, and the sun has officially decided that mercy is not on the schedule today. Its warmth presses gently at first, then insistently, like a toddler poking your shoulder. You sigh, adjust your tunic, and keep walking. As the houses thin out, the ground changes beneath your feet. The tightly packed village earth loosens into softer sand, and the air carries that unmistakable scent of Nile irrigation. Water, warm soil, and the slight tang of algae. The fields spread out before you in long stretches, green where the water flows well, brown where the soil is waiting for its next drink. Simple wooden tools lean against the field edges, left there by workers who know no one in the village is going to steal a hoe. What would they even do with it? Start their own competing field? You pause at the edge of the nearest irrigation ditch, where the water moves in a slow, determined glide. These man-made channels, lifelines carved from the Nile, turn a desert into farmland. A mainstream historical fact comes to mind. The annual flooding of the Nile once deposited rich black silt across the fields, but in many eras, especially later ones, villagers depended just as much on irrigation labour as on the natural flood cycle. Water wasn't just a resource, it was the schedule that ruled your entire life. You kneel near the ditch, using a small wooden scoop to guide water into a narrower channel. It's simple work, but surprisingly satisfying, until the mud sucks at your feet with that wet slurping sound that means you'll have to pry yourself free like a carrot. You wobble, flail, and manage not to fall in. A nearby farmer gives you a supportive nod that somehow also communicates, "We've all been there, the ditch always wins." As you move along the bank, checking whether the water is flowing evenly into the small field your family manages, a donkey wanders over and stares at you with an expression of deep philosophical confusion. Donkeys in ancient Egypt were indispensable, beasts of burden, transport companions, and part-time comedians. This one noses your hip, apparently hoping you've brought snacks. You haven't, so it sighs dramatically and trudges away. You wade into the shallow edge of the field, letting the cool mud swallow your ankles. It squelches between your toes, a sensation both soothing and mildly alarming. You spread the water with your hands, making sure it reaches the far corners. A quirky tidbit floats through your mind. Some villages honoured minor household deities believed to protect irrigation channels, and offerings, mostly tiny bits of food, were sometimes tossed into ditches to encourage the water to behave. You glance at the ditch. You're very tempted to throw it a bit of breakfast bread to make the work go smoother. A pair of farmers approach, carrying long hoes with bent wooden shafts. One greets you with a friendly wave, the other launches into a monologue about how the weeds this year have conspired against him. Not just grown, conspired. You listen politely while tugging at a stubborn clump of uninvited greenery. Historians still argue whether Egyptian villages organised field labour by households, rotating groups, or a semi-formal local system. From the intensity of today's weed gossip, you're leaning toward chaotic teamwork. The sun climbs higher, your tunic clings to your back, the breeze disappears like it owed someone money. Sweat beads along your forehead, slipping down your temples. You squint up at the sky, it squints back, unimpressed. You take a moment to stand still, hands on your hips, breathing in the warm, earthy air. The field stretches around you like a patchwork of human hope, every row planted with the quiet belief that the Nile, the sun, and the soil will cooperate for one more season. You're just one of many people bending, lifting, shaping, coaxing life from the land in this endless partnership between villages and river. After a while, your arms begin to ache, the good solid ache that says you're doing something real. You straighten, stretching your back. A small lizard darts across your foot. You nearly jump out of your skin, then glare at it. The lizard does not care. Someone farther down the field calls out that the western ditch needs checking, and you sigh, loudly, dramatically, and start, trudging in that direction. Your feet make squelch sounds that absolutely ruin any chance of feeling dignified. But there's a strange calm in the repetition. Lift water, redirect water, pull weeds, patch a ditch wall, check the level, repeat. The motions become a rhythm, steady and hypnotic, like the river itself breathing in and out. You pause only when the sun lands squarely on your shoulders, hot enough to make you reconsider every life choice. Heat shimmer dances above the fields, turning distant figures into wavering ghosts. Somewhere, someone curses at a stubborn irrigation plug. Someone else starts humming. A flock of birds circles overhead, looking for insects kicked up by the disturbance. You wipe your hands on your tunic, not cleaner, just differently dirty, and make your way toward the slight shade of a tall reed clump at the field's edge. For a moment, you sit, listening to the distant splash of water, the slap of reeds against each other, and the low murmur of workers sharing stories to pass the time. The mud dries slowly on your ankles, cracking in tiny patterns. You'll wash it off later when you head back to the village, but for now, it's part of you. Field stamped, Nile approved. You push yourself up, stretch your weary arms, and step back into the sunlit rows. The work continues. It always does. The sun climbs higher until it feels like a glowing coin pressed directly against the crown of your head. Whatever coolness lingered from the morning is long gone now, burned away by the desert's stubborn insistence on being dramatic. You squint up toward the brilliant sky, blinking at the harsh light. It isn't even noon yet, but the heat is already wrapping itself around you like a heavy linen cloak soaked in warm bath water. You sigh, not delicately, but with the full-body despair of someone who knows the worst hours are still ahead. You trudge out of the field, mud flaking from your ankles as you follow the narrow track back toward the village. Everyone is slowing down. The farmers who were chatting earlier now move with quiet, exhausted precision. A donkey stands in the shade of a lone thorn tree, absolutely refusing to acknowledge further responsibilities. Even the birds seem to have taken a break, gliding lazily instead of darting around as they did at dawn. The heat is a living thing now, buzzing in your ears, pressing against your skin, seeping through your clothing. A mainstream historical fact flickers in your thoughts. Ancient Egyptian workers often laboured through intense heat with only short breaks, relying on headcloths, shade walls, and sheer stubbornness to get through the midday hours. Hydration wasn't a wellness trend, it was survival. You reach the edge of the village again, stepping between two low houses where the shadows are dense and merciful. For one glorious moment, the shade cools your skin just enough that you can breathe easier. You lean against the wall, letting your heartbeat slow. The mud brick is warm, but not scorching yet. Later, it will be like leaning against an oven. Nearby, a neighbour sits on a low stool in front of her home, fanning herself with a woven palm frond. She lifts it in a lazy greeting, the breeze she creates barely enough to stir a single hair on her head. Her toddler sits beside her, sticky with date juice and absolutely delighted with life. The child holds out a half-mashed date to you in a gesture of pure generosity. You politely decline, and the toddler shrugs and eats it anyway. A tiny champion. You continue down the lane, noticing how the village seems to tighten inward during these hours. People cluster in patches of shade, sitting under awnings inside courtyards or beneath makeshift reed canopies. A few men sit outside a home, scraping old mud off tools. They argue softly about whether the coming season will be a good one for barley. Historians still argue about how villagers predicted harvests. Was it observation, superstition, or just vibes? Honestly, listening to them now, you're leaning heavily toward vibes. A clay jar filled with water sits on a wooden stand by one doorway. The porous material cools the water inside through slow evaporation. You take a careful sip from the ladle resting on top. The water tastes faintly like earth and clay, refreshing in a way you didn't expect. As you put the ladle back, you catch the faintest breeze pulling down the lane. It carries the warm smell of grain, dried reeds, and sun-baked dust. You head toward a slightly opened courtyard gate where someone is waving you inside. It's your neighbour's home, shaded by a tall canopy of woven reeds that filter the sunlight into soft golden stripes. Inside, a couple of people sit around a low mat fanning themselves while someone else tends to a small pot of onions cooking slowly over a minimal flame. The smell is sharp but comforting, like a familiar handshake from your stomach. You take a seat on the mat, grateful for the break. Someone hands you a small cup of lightly fermented beer, barely alcoholic and more like grain water with ambition. You sip it slowly. It cools your mouth and fills your stomach with a gentle warmth. A woman across from you cracks a joke about how no one in the village looks attractive at noon because the sun melts all dignity. She's not wrong. You laugh, wiping sweat from your chin. The entire courtyard smells faintly of dust, herbs, and the onions simmering nearby. A quirky tidbit slips into your mind. In many Egyptian villages, households sometimes hung wet cloths in doorways during the hottest hours to cool the incoming air. You spot exactly that hanging near the gate, a damp linen sheet fluttering softly, offering the gentlest hint of relief each time the breeze stirs. A cat sprawls near your feet, belly up, paws limp, doing its best impression of someone who has given up on responsible adulthood. Its tail twitches once, then lies still. You entirely sympathise. Eventually you stand, thanking your neighbours, and step back into the lane. The sky is bright enough to make you wince. You walk slowly, sticking to every bit of shade like a lizard, with strategic life choices. Every so often you pass a doorway where a family sits on the floor, too drained to talk, waving small fans back and forth with the synchronized rhythm of people who know that stopping means suffering. Near the western side of the village, you come across a handful of young boys playing a game involving small stones. They toss them in the air, trying to catch as many as possible on the back of their hands. One boy drops half his stones and dramatically declares himself defeated forever. Another boy rolls his eyes and tells him to try again. Even in absurd heat, children always find ways to be dramatic. You continue down the lane, feeling the heat cling to your skin like a second layer of clothing. The air hums, low, steady, relentless. Somewhere, a pot lid clinks. A goat bleats softly. A woman calls her child inside to rest. A man mumbles a quiet prayer for cooler weather, even though everyone knows such requests usually get ignored. You reach the edge of the village where the shade ends and sunlight pours over you again in one heavy wave. You pause, letting your eyes adjust, letting your breath ease. The world is still, shimmering with heat. This is midday in an Egyptian village. Slow, warm, sleepy and strangely peaceful. A time when everything softens, slows and melts into a single continuous moment. And you, sweaty, dusty, tired, are right in the centre of it, feeling the ancient rhythm of heat and rest settle into your bones. You slip back into motion, following a lane that leads toward a cluster of small workshops near the centre of the village. Even in the heat, you can hear the soft, rhythmic thumping of tools, evidence that some crafts simply can't wait for cooler hours. As you turn a corner, the air changes again. Less open sun, more shade, more dust hanging lazily in the stillness. You duck beneath a low reed awning stretched between two houses, welcoming its dim, dappled light. Just ahead is the weaver's space, one of the quietest, warmest, and most mesmerizing corners of the village. The entrance is simple, a loosely hung piece of linen gently fluttering. When you slip inside, the temperature drops noticeably. The room is lit only by narrow slits in the wall, and the low orange glow of sunlight filtering through the cloth. It feels like stepping into a cooled pocket of time. The loom dominates the room, tall, wooden, strung with vertical lines of thread that catch the light like spider silk. A woman sits cross-legged beside it, weaving with slow, practiced movements. Her fingers move like water, slipping between threads, pulling a shuttle through with barely a sound. The only noise is the faint click of wood and the soft whisper of fibers rubbing together. If you ever wondered what the sound of patience was, this is it. She looks up and smiles at you, the calm kind that feels like shade in human form. She gestures for you to sit. You accept gratefully, lowering yourself onto a mat worn smooth by years of visitors, resting here during the hottest hours. A mainstream historical fact crosses your mind. Textile production in ancient Egypt wasn't just a household chore, it was an economic backbone. Villages like this supplied linen cloth not only for daily wear but for trade, for temple offerings, and for the astonishing amount of linen needed for mummification. If you ever feel overwhelmed by laundry, imagine needing hundreds of meters of cloth just for one very important customer in the afterlife. The weaver picks up a bundle of flax fibers from a basket, straw-coloured strands that look like dry grass. She explains how they must be soaked, beaten, spun, and twisted into thread before they ever become cloth. Her voice is low, soothing, almost hypnotic. She makes it sound simple, but her hands tell a different story. Calloused, strong, and steady from years of making magic out of plants. As she works, a faint cloud of lint drifts through the air. You inhale accidentally and fight back a sneeze. A moment later, a child in the corner sneezes explosively, proving that the workshop has its own opinions about respiratory comfort. The weaver chuckles. Apparently, this is a universal occupational hazard. You look around the workshop. Finished textiles hang from pegs along the wall. Some plain, some dyed faintly blue or red using minerals and plant extracts. A quirky tidbit pops into your mind. While Egyptian art often shows people wearing crisp white linen, in tiny villages like this, clothes were rarely white for long. Dust, sun, sweat, and dye all left their mark. The pristine white outfits in tomb paintings, basically the ancient equivalent of Instagram filters. A second woman enters carrying a basket of thread spools. She sits beside you and begins winding spare fibers into long, thin strands. Her movements are rhythmic and meditative. After a moment, she starts chatting about a strange rumor from a nearby village that someone found a clay jar sealed with wax that hadn't been opened in generations. What was inside? Opinions vary. Honey, grain, a scorpion. Historians still argue whether sealed jars were common storage or special ritual offerings. The weaver shrugs, saying she won't believe anything until she sees it with her own eyes. The conversation drifts to lighter topics. How someone's goat keeps wandering into their kitchen, how a child recently announced that he wanted to grow up to be a professional crocodile trainer, terrifying, and how the temple scribe tripped over his own sandals yesterday in full view of half the village. You smile, sinking further into the room's peaceful bubble. A shaft of sunlight breaks through a crack in the wall and lands directly on a bowl of dyed threads, making them glow like hidden treasure. You watch dust motes swirl in the beam, drifting lazily like tiny stars. The weaver pauses and wipes her forehead, then resumes her work with the kind of calm determination that only comes from doing the same task for a lifetime. It's oddly soothing. Being here, surrounded by the gentle clatter of the loom, the muffled conversations, the smell of reed mats and warmed fibers, time slows. Your shoulders loosen. The heat outside fades into a distant memory. For a few minutes, it feels like the entire world shrinks to the sound of threads being pulled, one after another, a rhythm ancient, timeless, steady. Finally, as the weaver ties off a row and sets her tools aside, she tells you you're welcome to rest here any time. You bow your head gratefully, rising to your feet. As you step out into the sunlight again, the brightness feels sharper after the workshop's cool dimness. But you breathe easier now. That pocket of calm stays with you as you walk back into the heart of the village. Stepping out of the weaver's shaded workshop is like being gently slapped by the sun. The brightness pours over you in one harsh, glittering sheet, and for a second you just stand there blinking, trying to remember what cool air feels like. The village hums around you again, voices drifting across courtyards, the thump of someone pounding grain, a distant donkey unleashing a complaint that echoes off the mud brick walls like a dramatic monologue. You inhale slowly, letting the warmth settle onto your skin without overwhelming you. Your steps carry you toward a familiar open space where two lanes meet. It's nothing official, no signposts, no grand design, but it's become a natural gathering spot for villagers needing a quick rest or a quick story. The shade from a floor-level awning spills across the ground, inviting you in like a cool, dusty hug. You gratefully accept. A few neighbours sit on low stools arranged in a half-circle, all of them clutching small cups of watered beer or chewing bits of date pulp. The moment they see you, they wave you over with easy familiarity. Ancient Egyptian villages had no privacy, but they had abundant community. You slide into a spot beside a man fanning himself with a palm strip. He hands you a cup, and you sip it gratefully. It's cool, mildly tangy, and so refreshing you briefly consider drinking it in one go, though you restrain yourself because no one wants to be that person. Someone leans in and asks if you've heard the latest story about a crocodile sighting along the canal last night. You raise an eyebrow. There's always a crocodile story. Every village has at least one person who insists that every ripple in the water is a deadly monster. The storyteller raises his hands dramatically and launches into the tale anyway. The group listens with the polite skepticism usually reserved for family gossip. A mainstream historical fact pops into your mind. Crocodiles and hippos genuinely posed real threats along the Nile, especially in rural areas. So yes, today's story is exaggerated, but not entirely impossible. As the storyteller reaches the part where the crocodile supposedly blinked with malicious intent, the group bursts into laughter, including you. It feels good, warm, easy, familiar. Laughter in this heat is a kind of rebellion, like telling the sun it doesn't control everything. A child sitting behind you tugs at your tunic. He holds up a handful of shiny stones, asking if any of them are magical. You look at the stones, each one dusty and slightly chipped, and you give him the most official answer possible. Absolutely, but only if you keep them safe. The child gasps triumphantly, then darts away to brag. The adults around you try not to laugh too loudly. The conversations shift naturally, weaving like the threads in the workshop you just left. Someone talks about a bird that's been circling the fields, probably a kite-hunting mice. Another mentions a rumour that a nearby village is building a new granary. Someone else sighs loudly about how their neighbour borrowed a basket, temporarily, 3 weeks ago, and has not returned it. Historians still argue whether these small social negotiations, borrowing tools, sharing grain, trading favours, formed a regulated system or were just guided by the unspoken law of don't be annoying. Listening to the group now, you suspect the latter. You stretch your legs out, feeling the stiffness in your calves slowly ease. One woman begins recounting the story of a dream she had last night, full of dancing fish and a talking ibis that told her to plant garlic. This sparks a passionate debate about dream symbolism. Half the group insists dreams always carry meaning. The other half insists dreams are just your brain making noise when it's bored. You sip your drink and watch them argue with good-natured animation. The only thing more Egyptian than bread and the Nile is the absolute conviction that dreams matter. A quirky tidbit drifts through your mind. In many villages, dream interpreters, formal or informal, were consulted for everything from family problems to crop decisions. Sometimes these interpreters were elders, sometimes midwives, and sometimes the loudest person in the room. Today's debate seems to support that final theory. A soft breeze stirs the awning above you, and blessed coolness slides over your face. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the chatter wash over you, the clinking of cups, the rustle of linen, someone's exaggerated gasp at part of the story you missed. The slow rhythm of fans waving. It's like lying in a hammock of sound, gentle, constant, soothing. Eventually the group shifts topics to the small gossip of the day, a missing goat, a pair of siblings caught sneaking figs from the drying racks, and the question of whether the temple scribe's sandals were too fancy for everyday use, they were. The banter is light, easy, almost musical. After a while, someone nudges you and asks whether you're headed to the market this afternoon. You nod. They grin knowingly. The market is small, dusty and chaotic, but it's still the heart of village life, the place where news spreads fastest, tempers flare quickest, and snacks appear mysteriously from pockets. You stand slowly, brushing dust from your tunic. The group gives you lazy waves and tired smiles. One person tells you to stay cool. Another jokes that you're going to melt anyway. You fire back with a remark about borrowing someone's fan, earning a chorus of chuckles. You step back into the sunlight, warmed from the inside now, not by the heat, but by the people who make even the hottest part of the day feel bearable. Stories, gossip, shared air, shared shade. These are the threads that hold village life together just as much as grain or water. You turn toward the path leading to the market, your feet already remembering the route. The day is far from over, and the village has many more rhythms waiting for you. You follow the gentle slope of the lane until it opens into the small, sun-splashed cluster of stalls that the village generously calls a market. It isn't grand, nothing like the bustling bazaars in bigger towns, but it hums with the kind of steady, practical life you've come to love. A few awnings stretch between wooden poles, woven reed mats hang loosely to create shade, and the air smells like warm grain, dust, dried fish, and a hint of sweetness drifting from someone's date basket. The ground here is more trampled than anywhere else in the village, packed smooth by hundreds of footsteps. You step carefully around a pair of hens who have appointed themselves market inspectors, pecking at imaginary crumbs with great authority. A child shoos them half-heartedly, but they ignore him entirely. Chickens answer to no one. Several vendors call quiet greetings as you pass. No one shouts aggressively. Egyptian village commerce is more gentle persuasion than hard sell. You begin at the grain stall, where a man sits cross-legged behind a heap of barley, measuring out portions with a worn clay scoop. He nods at you, lifting a portion meaningfully. You check your small pouch of payment, barley from your own household supply, and hand him a modest offering. Barter rules everything here. A mainstream historical fact drifts through your mind. In many rural communities, money wasn't used daily. Instead, goods moved in a cycle of grain, beer, oil, and labour. Your little exchange today is part of that ancient circular economy. You tuck the small bundle of barley into your sling, and your eye catches a basket of dried onions nearby. The vendor, a cheerful woman with a sun-bleached scarf, waves one onion at you like she's offering a rare treasure. You laugh and shake your head. She shrugs dramatically, pretending her entire world has collapsed because you said no. This is her performance every day, and honestly, she deserves applause. A few steps away, a potter sits beside an arrangement of jars, bowls, and cups. Some are freshly fired, their surfaces still holding a faint amber glow. Others display tiny imperfections, the kind villagers barely notice but potters obsess over. You squat to inspect a medium jar, tracing your thumb along its rim. The potter leans forward with a proud grin. "Good one," he says. "Won't leak unless you ask it nicely." You chuckle. A quirky tidbit flashes into memory. Egyptian potters often believed certain jars had personalities and would warn customers to treat particular shapes more gently. You decide not to test whether this jar has temper issues. A small commotion draws your attention. Two boys haggling loudly over a handful of figs. One insists the figs are from a magical tree. The other counters by claiming his neighbour saw a snake sleeping in that tree, which apparently increases their value. The magical snake figs debate escalates until the vendor interrupts, telling them both to either buy something or go sweep the lane. Historians still argue whether such marketplace theatrics were part of long-standing tradition, or if children simply invented chaos wherever possible. You move next toward the fish stall, an optimistic name, given that the fish are tiny, sun-dried, and curled like exclamation points. The woman selling them fans away flies with the efficiency of someone who could spar with insects professionally. You consider buying some, but the memory of yesterday's overly salty stew flashes through your mind and you politely decline. The fish seller shrugs with a resigned smile. You can practically hear her thinking, "Suit yourself, but don't complain later when your dinner tastes like sadness." From behind a screen of woven reeds, a man appears carrying a tray of simple reed baskets. Some are tightly woven, good for storing grain. Others are loose and decorative, the kind households might use for drying herbs. You pick one up experimentally and run your fingers across its rough texture. The man beams at you and proudly explains how he dyed the reeds using crushed ochre. Whether that claim is true or the heat has made him creatively confident, you're not entirely sure, but the basket is lovely. Walking deeper into the market's shade, you stop at a cloth stall displaying scraps of linen dyed in faint colours. Pale blues, soft reds, muted yellows. Nothing flashy. Dyes are precious here. But the stall-keeper lifts a small cloth square to show you its stitching, and you instantly recognise the hand of the weaver you visited earlier. You smile, appreciating the quiet connectedness of village work, every craft feeding into the next. You consider buying the square, but your budget today is modest. You offer a friendly compliment instead, and the stall-keeper grins as though you've given her a chest of gold. Toward the far side of the market, you hear raised voices. Not angry, just animated. You wander closer and find a trio of elders debating something with the intensity of diplomats arguing over borders. One swears the Nile will rise high this season, another insists it will be low, the third claims the gods told him the level will be perfectly average. You lean against a post, listening. Their disagreement is fiery yet gentle, fueled by years of experience and the unspoken knowledge that none of them have any actual control over the river. A soft smile pulls at your mouth. These debates happen every year, just another timeless part of village life. You pause at a nearby stall offering small trinkets, amulets, carved wooden animals, tiny stone beads. A child runs up to grab a scarab charm, declaring that it will protect him from nightmares. You consider picking up something similar, but decide to save your grain for actual necessities. Still, the scarab catches your eye, its carved lines sharp and expressive. You promise yourself you'll come back for it another day. A faint breeze flickers across the market now, carrying hints of Nile water and the dusty sweetness of figs. It's a small relief, but you savour it deeply. People move more slowly here, conserving energy as the heat continues its midday dominance. Yet despite the exhaustion, there's warmth, human warmth, woven into every interaction. You buy a small handful of dried dates before stepping away, their sticky sweetness clinging to your fingertips. A goat saunters up, sniffing hopefully. You give it one date. It tries to climb your tunic for another. You reconsider your generosity immediately. As you exit the market, the midday sun casts long, shimmering waves of heat across the path. Your errands are done, but curiosity pulls you toward the next familiar place, the temple's outer wall, where scribes spend the afternoon recording the village's ebb and flow. You brush dust from your legs and begin walking. You follow the lane away from the market, the sun still blazing, but the air shifting slightly as you approach the broad, pale mud brick wall of the village temple. It rises above the surrounding houses like a patient guardian, solid, weathered, and unmistakably important. This is where the village's paperwork, rituals, arguments, blessings, and quiet bureaucratic chaos converge. Even the air feels a bit more serious here. You step into the temple courtyard's outer area, shaded by a pair of tall palm trunks lashed together to support a woven awning. The space is cooler, calmer, and filled with the faint smell of ink and papyrus, sharp, earthy, and oddly comforting. You immediately spot the scribes, 3 of them today, sitting cross-legged at low wooden boards, reed pens dancing over papyrus sheets with the steady rhythm of people who have made neat handwriting their entire personality. One scribe looks up and nods at you, eyes squinting, posture straight, expression carrying that classic, "I'm doing important things, please notice," energy. You smile and settle nearby, careful not to cast a shadow across their work. If scribes hate anything, it's smudges. A mainstream historical fact crosses your mind. Scribes were among the most respected individuals in ancient Egypt. They documented grain deliveries, water schedules, taxes, contracts, and temple offerings. In a world without calculators or spreadsheets, these were the people who kept society from collapsing into very polite chaos. The scribe nearest you dips his reed pen into a small palette of soot-based ink and continues writing. You peer over, curious. The papyrus sheet is covered in neat columns of hieratic script. Quick, flowing, elegant. He's listing grain owed to the temple from various households. You spot your family's name and relax when you see everything is in order. For now, anyway. He glances at you and smirks, murmuring that last week he misspelled the name of a particularly grumpy farmer, who then insisted the gods were offended and demanded a redo. The scribe rolls his eyes so hard you're amazed they don't roll straight out of his skull. Historians still argue, he says dryly, whether villagers corrected scribes out of genuine devotion, or because they liked feeling superior for once. You bite back a laugh. You shift your gaze to the second scribe, who is drawing an inventory of temple goods, a collection of pots, jars, baskets, and a surprisingly long list of oil lamps. The lamps are apparently multiplying like startled goats. He mutters to himself, counting them under his breath, then recounting them in reverse order because he forgot whether he included the cracked one. You've never seen someone so annoyed at pottery. Behind him, under a deeper patch of shade, sit two temple aides preparing reed pens by slicing their tips with tiny knives. The reeds snap softly as they're trimmed to perfection. One aide looks far too young to wield a blade responsibly, yet he handles it with a practiced confidence that makes your fingers twitch with jealousy. A quirky tidbit floats into your thoughts. Scribes often chewed their reed pens to soften the tips between uses. Sure enough, one of the older scribes has a pen stem between his teeth, gently gnawing it like a scholar chewing gum. He catches you staring and shrugs. It helps. You pretend you believe him. You wander a little closer to the temple wall where faint, fading carvings decorate the plaster surface. They're not grand like the reliefs in big city temples, just simple symbols of local deities, fish, birds, a few protective eyes. Someone has recently repainted one symbol with ochre, and the colour glows warmly in the sun. You trace your fingers near it, not touching because temple paint is sacred and also probably sticky. The head scribe, sitting slightly elevated on a cushion that's definitely nicer than anyone else's, clears his throat and launches into a soft lecture about why proper record-keeping is essential to village harmony. He explains how grain tallies prevent disputes, how water rotations must be documented, and how forgetting to record a goat loan once nearly started a feud. You nod along politely. He seems to appreciate having an audience, even a mildly sweaty one. He gestures for you to come closer and shows you a small clay seal, an official stamp used to close jars and mark important documents. It's engraved with a tiny falcon. The detail is exquisite, crisp, despite years of handling. A mark of the temple, he says proudly. If this is on something, people listen. You take the seal gingerly, surprised at how heavy it feels for its size, a symbol of authority carved into clay. One of the scribes suddenly lets out a frustrated groan. A drop of sweat landed on his papyrus, smudging a line of script. You watch his spirit leave his body. He fans the sheet desperately, whispering apologies to Thoth under his breath. A few villagers nearby snort with quiet laughter. Even divine records aren't safe from the sun. A small group of farmers enters the courtyard carrying a clay pot. They approach the head scribe to report a field boundary dispute. You step aside to give them space, but you keep listening. Their argument involves a palm tree, a broken marker stone, and a goat that apparently just walks where it wants. Historians still argue whether ancient boundary disputes were handled more by local custom or by written documentation. Based on this scene, you suspect neither system works perfectly. You linger a bit longer, watching the scribes work. The scratching of reed pens, the rustle of papyrus sheets, the soft murmur of measured voices, it's all strangely calming, like watching a slow, dusty version of calligraphy ASMR. Eventually the heat begins to rise again, nudging you toward the lane outside. You stand, stretch, and nod your thanks to the scribes. The head scribe waves lazily, already turning back to his work. You step out of the courtyard and back into the bright afternoon sun, feeling slightly wiser, slightly sweatier, and fully ready to see what part of village life waits for you next. You follow the sunlit path along the outer wall of the temple, letting your fingers drift across the warm mud brick until the lane curves gently toward a quieter corner of the complex. Here, shaded by a cluster of palms and framed by low wind-shaped walls, sits the small annex where the village priests spend their afternoons. It's not imposing, nothing like the towering sanctuaries in big cities, but it carries a soft authority, the kind that settles into your bones before you even realize it. As you step into the shaded courtyard, the temperature drops just enough to make your shoulders sag in relief. A few villagers sit waiting on low benches, holding humble offerings, a handful of grain, a small jar of oil, a sprig of fresh herbs. These aren't dramatic gifts. No gold, no elaborate trinkets, just everyday tokens of gratitude or worry. The priests serve the community more like counselors than lofty intermediaries. You find yourself instinctively lowering your voice, as if the air itself requests quiet. One of the priests, an older man with a shaved head and linen robe that's definitely cleaner than yours, glances up and offers a gentle nod. You return it. Everyone in the village knows him. He's the type of person who can calm a shouting match with a single raised eyebrow. A mainstream historical fact floats into your thoughts. Village priests weren't always full-time religious specialists. Many balanced their ritual duties with farming, record-keeping, or overseeing small civic tasks. The priest before you probably spent the morning feeding goats before stepping into this more sacred role. You approach slowly, joining a group of villagers gathered under the wide palm roof. One woman speaks quietly to a younger priest about a troubling dream, something involving a snake, a broken pot, and a relative she hasn't spoken to in years. The priest listens patiently, nodding, occasionally asking gentle questions. He doesn't dismiss her dream, doesn't mock it, doesn't rush her. He just listens. The entire village respects this. Being heard is as close to luxury as anyone gets around here. When her turn ends, another villager steps forward. A man whose donkey has been refusing to enter the irrigation path for 2 days straight. You bite your lip, fighting a smile. The priest takes this problem with the same solemnity as the dream. He asks whether the donkey saw something frightening, whether the path is too muddy, whether the man yelled at it. The man insists he did not, and whether the donkey has simply decided it needs a vacation, which earns a ripple of laughter from everyone within earshot. You settle onto a low bench, listening, letting the rhythm of their conversations drift around you. The priests rarely offered definitive answers. Instead, they help villagers untangle their thoughts, soothe their anxieties, or interpret signs in a way that brings comfort. Historians still argue whether these priests functioned more as community leaders, mediators, or spiritual healers. Watching them now, you're convinced they were all three, plus part-time therapists. A quiet rustle catches your attention. Behind the priest's seating area is a small shrine niche, decorated with modest offerings. A few flowers, a bit of bread, a tiny clay figurine of a goddess with protective wings. The figurine has a chipped nose but radiates an undeniable warmth. You bow your head briefly, the gesture coming naturally, like a reflex shaped by years of reverence. The older priest stands and motions for everyone to rise. He walks to the small altar platform and lights a bit of incense made from local herbs. The smoke curls into the air, thin, steady, fragrant. It smells like dried mint and cracked resin. He murmurs a short blessing, thanking the gods for the day, the Nile, the fields, and the community. Nothing grand, nothing theatrical. Just a simple prayer woven from gratitude and routine. You breathe in the incense, feeling it soothe the last bit of tension in your chest. Even the village dogs seem calmer here. One naps in a corner, paws twitching as it dreams of chasing something slower than the chickens that usually outrun it. A quirky tidbit flickers through your mind. Some villagers believe the spirits of ancestors lingered near temple walls, keeping watch over the living. People often whispered greetings to those spirits without even thinking about it. As you watch a woman place a small flower beside the shrine, you catch yourself quietly saying hello to the unseen company you half believe might be listening. You shift your attention to the younger priest, who has now begun sorting small clay tokens that villagers use to make ritual requests. Tokens shaped like fish, birds, or eyes. He arranges them with meticulous care, occasionally chuckling when a child toddles over to grab one before being gently redirected. You smile. This mixture of sacred and domestic is what makes the temple feel so deeply woven into the village's heartbeat. After the incense ritual ends, the older priest sits beside you, wiping a thin sheen of sweat from his brow. He makes a dry joke about how even the gods should take afternoon naps in weather like this. You laugh softly, grateful for the shade, the stillness, the gentle companionship. He asks about your morning in the fields, about your family, about whether your roof leaks after last month's rare rain. It feels more like chatting with a wise uncle than seeking spiritual guidance. He also mentions, leaning in conspiratorially, that someone in the village tried to make their own incense last week and accidentally created a mixture that smelled like burning onions. The temple had been forced to do a counter-blessing just to clear the air. You choke back a laugh as he shakes his head with affectionate exasperation. Bless their enthusiasm, he sighs. As you talk, you notice how villagers drift in and out, offering quiet greetings or leaving small items for future rituals. No rush, no schedule. The temple is a place where time slows, where worries soften, where the village feels its most human. Eventually you rise to leave. The priests give you warm farewells, and the older one reminds you, almost fatherly, to drink more water before the heat climbs again. You bow slightly before stepping back into the lane. The sunlight feels gentler now, as though the shade of the priest's courtyard still clings to your skin. You breathe deeply, grounding yourself before heading toward the next part of village life waiting beyond the temple walls. You step back into the sunlight, the quiet calm of the priestly courtyard still lingering on your skin like a faint cooling mist. But the moment you round the next bend in the lane, that serenity gives way to the delightful, mildly chaotic reality of daily life in a small Egyptian village. Because here, animals roam everywhere, and they have absolutely no respect for personal boundaries. The first offender appears almost immediately, a goat standing proudly in the centre of the lane, chewing on what is unmistakably someone's stolen reed basket. It stares at you with the smug confidence of a creature who knows you can't unchew the basket, and therefore can't blame it properly. You sigh and step around it. The goat continues chewing without remorse. Behind the goat, a group of chickens scratch at the dirt, kicking up tiny puffs of dust with rapid, determined pecks. Chickens here are less farm animals and more mysterious agents of disorder. One crosses directly in front of you, glancing back with what feels like deliberate judgment. Another flutters onto a low wall and cackles loudly, as if sharing urgent gossip about your outfit. You accept the critique. A donkey trudges past, ears swaying like tired sails. Its owner trails behind, muttering about how stubbornness should be a punishable offence. The donkey stops, sighs dramatically, then walks again, just far enough to prove it's in charge. A mainstream historical fact pops into your head. Donkeys were the backbone of transportation in small Egyptian villages, carrying everything from grain sacks to building materials. They were indispensable, and deeply aware of it. A sudden movement near your feet makes you jump. A skinny village dog darts between your legs in hot pursuit of a runaway date. The dog snatches it triumphantly, tail wagging like a fan in fast forward before vanishing behind a nearby wall. Dogs here aren't really pets, more like semi-employed security guards who accept payment in scraps and occasional affection. You call out a half-hearted, "Hey," but you're mostly impressed the date survived the chase. You continue walking, navigating the crowded lane as if it's a puzzle designed by a chaotic deity. A pair of cows blocks the road next, huge, patient creatures with wide, slow eyes. They flick their tails lazily at flies, occasionally stepping sideways in a rhythm known only to them. A child stands nearby holding a handful of straw, trying to coax one forward. The cow looks at him, unimpressed. The child sighs. You really can't rush cows. They operate on a spiritual timeline. A quirky tidbit surfaces in your memory. In many villages, certain cows were believed to bring luck, especially those with unusual markings. Some households swore their cattle understood human emotions better than some humans did. Watching this cow refuse to move until it feels like it, you can't entirely disagree. You squeeze past the slow-moving cluster and soon find yourself near the edge of a courtyard where a small herd of goats has gathered. One goat hops onto a low platform, declaring itself taller and therefore superior. Another stands with its front hooves perched against a doorway, bleating incessantly as if complaining to management. A woman emerges with a stern glare, shooing them off with a broom. The goats scatter, but only a little. They'll be back. Farther along, a group of children chase a sheep that appears to have escaped its enclosure. The sheep is surprisingly fast, almost athletic. The children less so. They shriek with laughter as they sprint after it, arms flailing. You briefly consider helping, then remember your own previous sheep-related failures. You wish them luck and keep walking. As you proceed, the ground beneath you shows all the signs of a village shared by humans and animals alike. Hoof prints, scattered hay, little divots where chickens have scratched, and the unmistakable aroma of someone did not clean this soon enough. You breathe through your mouth, nodding with resigned acceptance. It's all part of the charm. Allegedly, a man passing by with a basket of greens warns you to watch out for the big bull near the southern lane. Apparently it wandered into someone's yard this morning and ate half their fig stash. The bull, according to him, looked pleased but not repentant. Historians still argue whether village animals had designated spaces or if everyone simply accepted their wandering as part of daily life. Judging by the village today, you'd guess the animals decided the rules, not the humans. Continuing deeper into the village, you spot a small pen beside a home where newly hatched chicks huddle under a clay pot tilted just slightly to create shade. Their tiny cheeps melt your heart instantly. Their mother, a formidable hen with the intensity of a palace guard, gives you a stare so piercing you bow your head respectfully before walking on. A group of women sits nearby sorting herbs, shooing away goats who approach with suspicious curiosity. One woman shakes a bundle of mint at a nearby cow as if scolding a child. The cow steps back, startled, then pretends it never wanted the herbs anyway. As you turn onto a slightly wider lane, a tall, lanky dog trots beside you for a few steps. It looks up at you, panting, tail swaying gently in the heat. Maybe it's hoping you'll drop a snack. Maybe it just wants company. Maybe it's evaluating you for unclear dog reasons. After a moment, it wanders off toward a shady corner, collapsing into a heap of tired superiority. At the far end of the lane, you pass by a home where pigeons roost in little clay pots embedded into the outer wall. One pokes its head out and coos pleasantly, watching you with bright, bead-like eyes. Ancient Egyptians kept pigeons not just for food, but for ritual symbolism and message carrying. This one seems more interested in village gossip. Despite the mild inconveniences and the occasional threat of stepping in something unfortunate, there's a strangely comforting rhythm to all this movement. Life in the village isn't separate from its animals. It's intertwined, noisy, messy, and deeply alive. You step around another chicken, laugh under your breath, and shake your head. If someone ever told you the village belonged to the people, you'd politely disagree. It belongs to the animals, and everyone here just coexists with their whims. You wipe a bit of dust from your tunic and continue walking, drawn toward the promise of evening light and the softer hours ahead. By the time you weave your way past the last opinionated goat and round the corner into your family's courtyard, the day has entered that soft, shifting moment when the sun begins its slow descent. The heat hasn't vanished, it never really does, but it's loosening its grip. Shadows stretch longer. The light turns warmer, gentler, more forgiving, like the world is finally exhaling after holding its breath since noon. A comforting smell greets you before you even step inside. Something sizzling, something earthy, something familiar. Dinner is underway. You duck through the low doorway and step back into the courtyard, now bathed in golden-orange light. A clay lamp has been placed on the ledge, unlit for now but ready for its nightly duty. Someone, probably a sibling, has swept the ground again, not because it helps for long, but because evening deserves at least the gesture of tidiness. Your mother stands near the small clay hearth, her figure outlined against the glow of the embers. She stirs a pot with slow, deliberate motions, steam curling up in soft ribbons. Near her, a bowl of chopped onion sits ready, along with a handful of herbs harvested earlier. A few flatbreads rest on a reed tray, waiting their turn over the warm stones. You inhale deeply. This is the smell of village comfort. Grain, heat, herbs, and the tired contentment that comes after a long day. You offer to help, and without looking up, she hands you a small clay bowl. Inside is a mixture of lentils, garlic, and a bit of crushed barley. Your job, mash. You take the wooden pestle and begin grinding, the sound rhythmic and grounding. A mainstream historical fact slips into your thoughts. Lentils were a staple in ancient Egypt, especially in rural villages. They were cheap, filling, and reliable. Basically the ancient equivalent of rice and beans, and tonight, you're grateful for their reliability. A younger sibling sits nearby, sorting through a pile of dried dates, removing stems and occasionally popping one into their mouth when they think no one is watching. Spoiler, everyone is watching, but it's evening, and no one has the energy to enforce rules. You wink at them, and they grin, revealing a mouthful of date mush. A neighbour's voice floats over the wall, calling greetings and asking if anyone has seen her missing clay lid. Someone responds that a goat took it. Everyone agrees this is entirely plausible. You finish mashing the lentils and hand the bowl over. Your mother pours the mixture into the pot, adding a splash of water from the jar you fetched this morning. It feels like closing a loop. You carried the water at dawn, and now it softens the food you'll eat at dusk. A quiet ritual of its own. The courtyard begins to fill with people returning home. Your father steps in, dust-covered and sun-flushed, easing himself down on a reed mat with a groan that sounds like he's been trampled by 3 donkeys and a cow. He fans himself with a woven palm strip. Hot, he mutters. Everyone nods sympathetically. It's the understatement of the century. Another sibling appears carrying a bundle of cut reeds from the river edge. They toss it beside the wall, explaining between breaths that there were definitely crocodile tracks near the far bank. A quirky tidbit flashes into your mind. Villagers often misinterpreted animal prints in the mud. Sometimes goat, sometimes dog, sometimes the gods walking among us. You suspect today's crocodile had suspiciously round hooves. Dinner nears readiness. The pot simmers quietly, filling the courtyard with a rich, savoury scent. The flatbreads warm on the hot stones, puffing slightly before falling back into their familiar shape. Your stomach grumbles loudly, and your father gives you a mock-serious glare as if your hunger personally insulted him. You set out the reed mats, smoothing them across the ground. A jug of cool water sits nearby, sweating slightly from the evening air. A few clay cups rest beside it, slightly chipped, slightly mismatched, perfectly functional. As the sun's last edge dips behind the rooftops, a soft glow spreads across the courtyard. Lamps are lit one by one, tiny flames blooming like sleepy fireflies. Shadows dance along the walls, creating a gentle flicker that feels almost hypnotic. Somewhere in the village, a flute begins to play, a simple melody drifting lazily through the air. Evening music is rare, but treasured. It softens the edges of the day. Dinner is served with no ceremony, no grand words, just bowls placed in front of each person and grateful murmurs drifting upward like little prayers. You tear a piece of bread, scoop lentils, and savour the first bite. Simple, warm, comforting. Exactly what your body craves after heat, dust, and effort. Your family chats between bites, small talk, light jokes, the retelling of the donkey's refusal to work earlier. Someone reenacts the donkey's dramatic sigh, and laughter spills across the courtyard. The tiredness in your limbs softens, replaced by the warmth of shared food, shared space, shared breath. Historians still argue whether village meals were strict family affairs or open to neighbours and wanderers. Tonight a neighbour slips through the gate with a bowl of pickled radish to share, and no one raises an eyebrow. This feels like the answer. You lean back on your hands, gazing upward. The sky has faded to deep blue. A single star glimmers faintly. The air cools inch by inch, carrying the soft scent of cooking fires settling into embers. Dinner slowly tapers off, bowls empty, breadcrumbs scatter. Conversation fades into comfortable silence, and as the last light of evening melts into night, you realise this. This small meal, in this small courtyard, surrounded by these familiar faces, might be the most peaceful moment of the entire day. You step out of the courtyard after dinner, letting the warmth of food and family linger in your chest as you drift toward the lane leading down to the water. The sky above you has deepened into a velvety twilight, streaked with the last pale ribbons of gold. The air is finally cooling, finally breathable, finally soft enough that you don't feel like you're being slow roasted for the amusement of the sun gods. Evening in the village always feels like a sigh of relief. Your sandals scuff gently against the sandy path as you follow the familiar slope toward the riverside. A few other villagers walk with the same quiet purpose, some in pairs, some alone, all drawn by the promise of the Nile's cool breath. The voices around you soften, as if the entire village collectively decided to switch to nighttime volume. The tall reeds rustle as you approach, their long shadows swaying in the growing dusk. The Nile comes into view, broad, dark, shimmering with silver where the moonlight reflects off its calm surface. You pause for a moment, letting the river's presence settle over you like a cool cloth on a fevered forehead. A mainstream historical fact flickers through your mind. For ancient Egyptians, the Nile wasn't just a river. It was the axis of life, the centre of space, time, work, hope, and fear. Every village, no matter how tiny, shaped its rhythms around the river's moods. Standing here now, feeling the faint breeze lift your hair, you understand why. You find a comfortable patch of ground near a low cluster of reeds and sit. The air is blissfully different this time of day, cooler, carrying hints of damp vegetation and silt. The faint chirping of crickets begins to rise, joined by the soft trill of night insects waking from their daytime coma. Together, they create a natural lullaby, slow and steady. Not far from you, a woman kneels at the water's edge, rinsing a clay bowl with gentle motions. A child sits beside her, splashing their hands and giggling at how the ripples distort their reflection. The laughter is soft, echoing lightly across the water. A dog approaches them, tail wagging hopefully, then reconsiders touching the water and trots away with dignified caution. You lean back on your palms, stretching your legs out, listening to the soft lap of waves. The river glows faintly now, moonlight painting it like brushed silver. A fisherman's small boat glides by in the distance, nothing but a silhouette and the rhythmic sound of a single paddle dipping into the water. You wonder if he's out for one last catch or simply enjoying solitude. Both seem equally valid. A quirky tidbit surfaces. Some villagers believed certain parts of the river were watched over by protective spirits, small guardians who lived among the reeds and kept dangerous creatures away at night. You glance at the tall reeds to your right. For a split second, the wind moves through them just so, creating the illusion of something small slipping between the stalks. You smile, not frightened, just a little charmed by the idea. The gentle hum of evening conversations carries from up the slope. A few young men stand farther down, skipping stones across the water. Their aim is questionable, their enthusiasm unstoppable. One insists he got 5 skips. Another counters that it was clearly 2. Historians still argue whether stone skipping was a recognized pastime, or whether humans just instinctively throw rocks when they're near water. Watching them now, you're confident it's pure instinct. You shift your weight, laying back fully so your head rests on your hands. The sky overhead deepens from blue to indigo. Stars begin peeking out one by one, tiny pinpricks of light arranging themselves with exaggerated slowness. You let your eyes soften, unfocusing until the stars blur just slightly, turning the entire sky into a gentle shimmer. Someone lights a small oil lamp near the riverbank, its flame glowing like a tiny warm planet. The flicker reflects across the water, dancing in broken lines. A frog croaks nearby, low and sluggish. A small bat flicks through the air above, catching insects with quick, sharp turns. This is the hour when everything loosens. The grip of the sun, the tension in your shoulders, the need to hurry. Even the river seems to slow its pulse. You breathe deeply, letting the coolness fill your lungs. A neighbour sits beside you, lowering themselves with the grunt of someone whose knees have seen too many seasons. They nod in greeting, then say nothing more. You sit together in silence, listening to the water. This is a common kind of companionship here. Not chatter, not planning, just shared existence under open sky. A drifting thought passes through your mind. Someday, historians may debate what evenings like this felt like. They may argue about temperature, soundscape, rituals, or whether villagers frequently relax by the river. But no debate can quite capture this precise combination of cool air, soft voices, and water murmuring steadily against the earth. You sit until your eyelids grow heavy and your body fully unwinds, the day's dust settling comfortably into your clothes and your bones. The river's rhythm steadies your heartbeat, syncing you with the ancient, unhurried pulse of the land. Finally you rise slowly, brushing off your tunic, savouring one last look at the moonlit water. The night is deepening, and the village is calling you back, not to sleep just yet, but to the warm glow of lanterns and the final tasks that fill the quiet hours before dreams. You turn toward the path, taking your time as you begin the slow walk back up the slope, the Nile whispering behind you like a lullaby you'll carry into the rest of the night. You make your way back up the gentle slope toward the village, leaving the shimmering silver of the Nile behind you. As you step between the familiar mud brick walls again, the atmosphere has shifted. The blazing heat of day is gone, replaced by a cozy, lantern-lit calm that feels like the world finally tucking itself in. Evening isn't sleepy yet, just softened. This is the hour of small tasks, slow routines, and quiet industry. You follow the warm flicker of oil lamps toward a cluster of homes where villagers often gather to finish the day's leftover errands. The lamps cast long, wavering shadows across the ground, making the lanes look like rippling fabric. Somewhere, a donkey snorts in its sleep. Somewhere else, a child giggles because they're supposed to be getting ready for bed, but absolutely are not. As you round a corner, you step into a courtyard glowing with lamplight. Several neighbours sit around low stools and mats, each busy with some small piece of work that didn't get finished before the heat struck at noon. A woman threads a needle with surprising precision, even in the dimness. A man ties reeds into bundles for roof repairs. A pair of children twist bits of palm fibre into makeshift rope, arguing about whose twist is better. You smile. Evening crafting is less about productivity and more about companionship. Someone waves you over to a shaded corner where a loom has been propped upright. Not the tall floor loom from the workshop earlier. This one is smaller, portable, and perfect for late-night finishing touches. A young woman sits beside it, feeding dyed thread through the wooden frame. She looks up and gestures for you to join her. You sit, grateful for the gentle glow of the nearby lamp. The air here carries the warm sense of night. Cooling clay walls, faint incense from the temple, the lingering aroma of cooked lentils drifting from homes around you. Your tunic still holds the faint smell of reed water from your riverside rest. Evening is a blend of everything. Food, work, quiet, dust, and somehow all of it feels comforting, like a weighted blanket made of ancient routine. The woman hands you a small bundle of thread and shows you where to hold the loom steady. You press your palms against the wooden frame, feeling the faint vibrations of each pull she makes. Her hands are skilled, her rhythm consistent. Every few minutes she ties off a small knot, trims a stray fibre, or hums a tune so soft you feel it more than hear it. A mainstream historical fact flickers through your mind. Many households in ancient Egypt contributed textile work in their spare hours, producing everything from basic linen strips to finely decorated bands. These late-night sessions weren't unusual. They were how villages met quotas, prepared offerings, and ensured families had clothing and trade goods. You are, in your own small way, part of that long-proven system. Nearby, an older man repairs an oil lamp, scraping away soot before refilling it. He grumbles about how lamps always burn faster at night, which scientifically speaking is not true, but spiritually speaking, everyone agrees it feels true. A younger neighbour laughs and teases him, claiming he simply fills the lamps too little. The old man pretends to be offended. You try not to grin too loudly. A few steps away, two women sort grain into storage jars, using tiny scoops to measure exact amounts. Their conversation drifts through gossip about who slipped while carrying water today, who found a cracked pot near the fields, and whose goat ate someone's herbs again. You hear your name and turn just in time to catch someone joking that you were nearly pulled into the irrigation ditch this morning. You consider defending yourself, then decide it's true enough to let stand. A quirky tidbit comes to mind. Villages sometimes held small evening competitions for weaving speed, lamp making, or even most efficiently sorted grain. No official prizes, just pride and bragging rights. Watching the grain sorting pair now, you suspect they'd win by sheer intensity alone. Someone offers you a cup of lightly warmed date drink. You accept gratefully and sip slowly. It's sweet, soothing, and tastes like the end of a long day. A cat weaves between everyone's legs, deciding who is worthy of its attention. When it reaches you, it pauses, sniffs the cup, and then curls itself against your hip with regal entitlement. Congratulations, you have been chosen. The loom creaks softly as the young woman finishes another line of weaving. She steps back, assessing the pattern with narrowed eyes. Satisfied, she gently removes the finished strip from the wooden frame and hands it to you for inspection. The thread colours, muted blue and faded red, glow gently in the lamplight. You run your fingers across the woven texture, admiring its subtle complexity. She starts explaining how she dyed the threads using crushed berries and hematite, but halfway through the explanation, she yawns so wide she nearly swallows the lamp flame. Everyone laughs, and she waves a hand, embarrassed but amused. Historians still argue whether these late-night tasks were done out of necessity or habit. Watching the courtyard now, with its soft chatter, warm light and gentle movements, you suspect it was both. Evening work wasn't just work, it was how the village stitched itself together day after day. The cat shifts against you, purring softly. Someone hands you another small piece of thread to roll. A neighbour asks how your walk by the river was. Another begins telling a story about a fisherman who once claimed to see a spirit dancing on the water. Whether true or exaggerated, the story floats through the courtyard like drifting smoke, weaving itself into the fabric of the moment. As the lamp flames flutter, casting rippling shadows across the walls, you feel the day's tiredness settle comfortably inside you. Soft voices, soft hands, soft light. Everything slows. This is late-night Egypt. Not loud, not hurried, not stressed. Just warm, steady hands finishing the day with a quiet kind of devotion. And you, sitting among them, let your breath sink with the last gentle hours before night folds fully into darkness. Night has deepened by the time you rise from the crafting courtyard, stretching your arms as the last of the lamplight flickers behind you. The village is quieter now, not silent, never silent, but wrapped in the kind of comfortable hush that settles after everyone has eaten, worked, washed, and talked themselves toward rest. You walk slowly, savouring the cool air brushing against your skin. The lanes have taken on that faint bluish tone that comes when moonlight slides across pale mud brick. You pass a corner where a group of children had spent the afternoon playing in the dust. Now the spot is empty, except for the small lopsided shapes they carved into the ground. Spirals, circles, what might be an animal or a very ambitious stick figure. Even in their absence, you can feel the lingering energy of their laughter. You smile, stepping carefully around their creations as though avoiding fragile artifacts. As you turn into a quieter passageway, you spot something dangling from a doorway. A small amulet shaped like a human eye, painted in soft blue with a black dot at the centre. It spins lazily in the breeze. The Eye of Horus, protector, watcher, healer. A mainstream historical fact flickers into your mind. Egyptians wore amulets constantly, embroidered them into clothing, buried them with the dead, and hung them in homes for protection. In small villages like this, amulets weren't decorations. They were everyday tools of comfort, the ancient equivalent of just in case. You approach the doorway and see a woman tying a fresh cord onto the amulet. She glances at you, smiling, then explains that she replaces the string each new moon for good luck. You ask whether it works. She shrugs with a laugh. Well, I'm still here, aren't I? Hard to argue with that logic. As you continue walking, your eyes adjust more completely to the dimness. More amulets appear, some shaped like tiny frogs, symbols of renewal, others like little protective eyes. A few doorways have clay plaques etched with simple symbols meant to ward away illness or bad dreams. You notice a cluster of dried herbs hanged beneath one lintel, fragrant, crackling softly in the night air. A quirky tidbit surfaces. In some villages, people placed bowls of natron or salt beneath their beds to absorb restless spirits. Whether you believe in spirits or not, you recall a time you tried placing some herbs under your mat and woke up with a cat sleeping on them. The cat seemed pleased. You were less certain. You turn a corner and nearly collide with an older man holding a clay jar. He chuckles at your startled expression and lifts the jar for you to see. Painted on its surface is a crude image of a crocodile. Harmless looking, almost comical. He explains it's a protective jar meant to keep crocodile spirits from wandering into the home. You nod seriously, even though part of you wants to ask how many crocodile spirits have tried this week. Instead, you simply admire the art. He beams proudly. A soft sound from above draws your gaze upward. On a rooftop, two women are placing small offerings near a shrine stone. Breadcrumbs, a few bits of crushed herbs, and what looks like a pinch of incense. They move with ritual familiarity, whispering phrases you can't quite hear. These rooftop shrines, simple as they are, feel as sacred as the temple itself. Historians still argue whether rooftop rituals were household traditions or local adaptations of greater temple practices. Watching the women now, you suspect they were simply acts of devotion, shaped by need, space, and comfort. You step into a broader lane where moonlight spills without obstruction. A faint breeze curls through the village, carrying the scent of cooling clay and distant reeds. The temperature has finally dipped into something gentle, soft against your skin, soothing after the day's relentless heat. You pause as a young girl appears from a doorway clutching a bundle of tiny beads. She holds them out to you shyly. Small, smooth blue-green beads strung on a thin cord. She explains that her grandmother taught her to make protective bracelets to keep the desert winds from sneaking dreams away. You tie one around your wrist. It's simple, but beautiful. The girl beams, proud of her handiwork. A few steps later, you overhear two neighbours whispering about a strange sound someone heard near the granary, something between a hiss and a whistle. It could be wind, it could be a snake, or it could be nothing at all. The way they discuss it, though, arms crossed, eyes narrowed, you get the sense they're leaning towards spirit with attitude. You quietly hope it's just a snake. You wander toward the open space near the centre of the village, where a small circle of stones marks a communal spot for late-night conversations. Tonight, only a couple of villagers sit there, an older woman with silver hair braided neatly down her back, and a middle-aged man wrapping a protective charm with linen. They greet you warmly and motion for you to sit. The older woman begins telling you about a famous story from her youth, when a wandering healer claimed he could detect evil spirits by the way dust swirled in sunlight. She laughs, shaking her head. He was wrong, of course. Dust swirls because dust is dramatic. You laugh with her, appreciating her wisdom. Practical, grounded, amused. The man speaks next, explaining that his charm is meant to protect his goat from wandering too far. You consider whether the charm will help. He considers it too. Both of you silently agree the goat will wander anyway. The conversation drifts into darker topics. Illness, misfortune, missing. Items, but the tone remains calm. You realise, sitting here under the moon, that superstitions aren't born of fear alone. They're tools of comfort, ways of explaining the unexplainable, of giving shape to anxieties so they feel smaller, manageable, shared. You rise after some time, thanking them before continuing your slow walk. The village is even quieter now. Lamps glow like tiny suns behind doorways. A baby cries softly somewhere, then quiets. A donkey rustles lazily in a nearby courtyard. The night is full, alive, gentle. As you head back toward your own home, you feel the protective weight of the new bracelet around your wrist. Maybe the bead charm will guard your dreams, maybe it won't. But here, under the cool Egyptian moon, surrounded by old beliefs and new stories, you feel safe anyway. You drift deeper into the village lanes, the moonlight brushing pale silver across every mud brick wall, every woven gate, every sleeping courtyard. The night has grown fully quiet now, a steady, resting stillness. But beneath that calm sits something else, a tension, a pulse. The subtle, unspoken truth that village life, for all its warmth and routine, carries small frictions that never fully disappear. You sense it before you see anything, a hush when you pass a certain doorway, a glance between two neighbours that lingers a moment too long, a half-finished sentence that evaporates when footsteps approach. It's not dramatic, it's not dangerous, it's just human. You walk slowly, letting your eyes adjust to the deeper shadows. The first sign of tension is almost comical. Two brothers sitting on opposite sides of a courtyard, arms crossed, each pretending not to look at the other. They nod stiffly when you pass, then immediately resume their silent duel. You later learn they argued earlier about whose turn it was to fetch water. A mainstream historical fact slips through your thoughts. Disagreements over labour division, fetching, grinding, sweeping, watering, were extremely common in ancient households. In small villages, fairness wasn't just ideal, it was survival. You offer the brothers a soft wave, but they're too busy pretending the other doesn't exist. As you step away, you hear one mutter, "He knows it was his turn." The other huffs dramatically in response. Ages-old conflict, powered by stubbornness and sibling pride. Farther down the lane, a more complicated tension simmers. A man stands outside a neighbour's home, arms folded tightly, jaw clenched hard enough to crack a date pit. When he sees you, he forces a smile, but it wavers at the edges. You recognise him, a farmer whose irrigation ditch collapsed earlier in the week. He'd assumed his neighbour would help him repair it. Village custom practically demands it. But the neighbour just happened to be too busy that day. Too busy is ancient code for "I don't feel like it," and the resentment has brewed ever since. You exchange a polite greeting and he gestures vaguely toward the fields, muttering something about people forgetting their duties. You nod sympathetically, offering a gentle, non-committal noise. Inside, you're thinking the same thing everyone thinks. These tensions will eventually fade, but for now, they're as real as the moon overhead. As you continue, the air shifts again. You catch quiet whispers from behind a half-open doorway. Two women deep in conversation about a missing basket. One insists she lent it out. The other insists she returned it. The basket is nowhere to be found. Both are positive the other is misremembering. Historians still argue whether ancient Egyptians kept formal household inventories or relied entirely on memory and communal accountability. Tonight, memory seems suspicious at best. You slip past without intruding, but the doorway conversation follows you in soft fragments. I swear it was right there. Maybe your son took it. My son? Absolutely not. Some quarrels span thousands of years. The eternal war over missing kitchenware. You turn a corner and find a small group standing beneath a lonely oil lamp. 3 men, 1 woman, arms crossed, voices low. The moment they notice you, they nod politely and try to look casual. You recognize this type of gathering instantly. It's the discussing something awkward formation. A goat stands beside them, chewing a stalk of dried grass with zero awareness of how suspicious it looks. You decide not to pry. They seem grateful. The lane narrows, and the shadows deepen. Here, you pass homes where tension isn't loud, just quietly present. A woman rests on her doorstep, face thoughtful, fingers turning the edge of her shawl again and again. You greet her gently. She responds with a small smile but doesn't elaborate on whatever fills her mind. It could be worry about a child's cough, or grain running low, or a dream that unsettled her. It could be anything. In a village this size, burdens circulate silently, shared in glances and pauses more than words. A quirky tidbit floats into memory. Some ancient villagers believed that unresolved tensions attracted restless spirits. Not malevolent, just meddlesome. People wore extra charms or burned herbs to prevent small arguments from growing legs. You glance discreetly. Yes, she has placed a tiny reed charm beside her doorway. Insurance. You continue walking, weaving through these small pockets of unease. Nothing explosive, nothing dangerous. Just the everyday frictions that come from living too close, sharing too much space, and depending too heavily on one another. Between these moments, life flows peacefully, but the seams are always there if you know where to look. At the far end of the lane, you find the softest form of tension of all, unspoken longing. A young man sits alone on a low step, staring thoughtfully across the lane at a window where a young woman occasionally appears to hang linens. Tonight, the window is empty, but he sits anyway, rehearsing lines he will absolutely never say aloud. When he notices you, he jolts slightly, then tries to cover it with a cough that fools no one. You grin, he turns pink, you move on. The final stretch of the lane opens into a small courtyard where a group of older villagers sits in near silence, each lost in their own thoughts. When you join them, they greet you with tired nods. Conversation eventually stirs, gentle and slow. They talk about the water levels, the harvest, the heat. But beneath their words, you sense it. The collective hum of lives shaped by interdependence, memory, favor trading, grudges and forgiveness. Village life may look simple from afar, but up close it's layered, woven tight with relationships that heal and strain, bind and pull. You sit with them for a while, letting your breath soften, letting the quiet settle. And as one elder says, almost in a whisper, there is no village without a little trouble. You understand exactly what she means. You rise from the elder's quiet circle and wander toward the broader open space near the heart of the village, a place that by day feels dusty and practical, but by night becomes something else entirely. The moonlight spreads across the ground in a wide silvery wash, and the soft glow from lamps and torches turns the once harsh lanes into warm, gentle corridors. It's the hour when the village relaxes its shoulders, loosens its breath, and remembers how to smile again. Even before you reach the space, you hear it, a melody drifting through the evening like a feather caught on a light breeze. It's thin at first, just a few plucked notes, but as you step closer, the sound blooms into something richer. Someone has brought out a necked lute, the small, rounded kind used across Egypt for generations. Its voice is soft but expressive, a little woody, a little sweet, a perfect nighttime instrument. A few villagers sit in a loose circle around the musician, some on reed mats, others on overturned baskets, and one man perched dramatically on a storage jar that absolutely cannot support him, but somehow does. You approach quietly, settling onto a mat with a grateful exhale. The day has been long, hot and heavy, but this moment is the antidote. The musician nods in greeting without breaking the rhythm of the melody. His fingers move with effortless familiarity, plucking and sliding across the strings. A mainstream historical fact drifts through your thoughts. Music was woven into ancient Egyptian life, heard in festivals, rituals, storytelling, even fieldwork chants. But in small villages, nighttime music like this wasn't ceremonial. It was simply human. A young woman beside the musician begins tapping a hand drum, its soft thump blending seamlessly into the melody. Another villager, who earlier nearly fell asleep in the weaving courtyard, starts humming under his breath, adding a gentle undercurrent. Slowly, without planning or instruction, a small ensemble forms. The music is simple, repetitive, comforting, like rocking on a quiet boat. Your shoulders relax almost immediately. Across the circle, a child sways sleepily in their mother's lap. A couple of teenagers whisper jokes between notes, trying, and failing, not to laugh too loudly. An elder leans back against a wall, eyes closed, lips curved into the faintest smile. The breeze shifts and carries the warm scent of cooling earth and faint traces of evening incense. As the song flows into a slower rhythm, someone nearby begins telling a story in that classic Egyptian tone that hovers between serious and mischievous. It's about a fisherman who swore he once saw a river spirit rise from the Nile to scold him for being lazy. The storyteller embellishes shamelessly, acting out the spirit's wagging finger and unimpressed stare. The circle erupts in soft laughter. A goat bleats from a distant courtyard as if offering commentary. A quirky tidbit surfaces. Some villagers believed certain stretches of the Nile had guardian creatures, half divine, half natural. Fishermen often told stories of them, usually after drinking a little too much fermented date beer. Tonight's tale, you suspect, belongs to that proud tradition. The story fades back into music. You close your eyes, letting the rhythm settle into your bones. The drum's soft pulse aligns with your breathing. The lute's melody spirals gently, weaving patterns that feel familiar even if you've never heard them before. It all blends into a kind of ancient ASMR, steady, soothing, quietly enchanting. Someone begins to clap along, slow and steady. Another claps in sync, then someone snaps along offbeat, causing a ripple of playful groans and teasing. The music falters for a moment as the musician laughs, shaking his head, then resumes with exaggerated precision. The circle dissolves into giggles. It's a small, harmless moment, but it feels enormous in its warmth. As the music settles again, a woman with a bright scarf leans close and tells you about a tradition from her grandmother. On nights when the moon is bright and the river breeze is cool, villagers used to sing lullabies meant not just for children, but for the entire community. Songs to put the village to bed, she says with a soft grin. Historians still argue whether this was widespread practice or just a local quirk, but the idea feels tender and true. She hums one of these lullabies now, low, rhythmic, slightly melancholic. It wraps around the circle like a shawl, and for a few breaths, everyone falls silent. You feel your chest loosen, your eyelids grow heavy, your thoughts drift like boats on a slow current. The song ends gently, like a whisper. A hush follows, not awkward, not empty, but deeply peaceful. Someone hands you a small cup of sweet date beverage. You take a sip, savouring the thick, honeyed flavour. A cat wanders into the circle and plops itself down beside the musician, claiming front row seating. The musician doesn't miss a beat. Eventually, voices begin to stir again. Light chatter replaces silence. Small stories, shared memories, jokes, yawns, soft teasing. Someone stretches dramatically, nearly tipping over their stool. Someone else lies back on the mat and announces they will not move until someone carries them home. No one offers. The music fades, the night deepens, and the village settles even further into its nighttime rhythm. You rise slowly, legs stiff but spirit softened. You thank the musician, exchange quiet farewells with the circle, and step back into the moonlit lane. The world feels gentler now, loosened by song, warmed by laughter, held together by the simple miracle of shared rest. There's only one chapter of the day left: sleep. You leave the circle of music behind, stepping into the quiet lane that leads toward your home. The village feels different now, not just quieter, but softer, as if every mud brick wall, every woven gate, every sleeping animal has relaxed into the night. Lamps flicker faintly behind doorways. A final few voices murmur from distant courtyards, drifting upward like warm smoke before fading into stillness. Your feet carry you toward your rooftop ladder almost on instinct. In a small Egyptian village, the roof isn't just a part of the house. It's the bedroom, the lounge, the observatory, the cool refuge from a day spent under punishing sun. You place a hand on the ladder's wooden rungs. They're smooth from years of climbing, faintly warm from the day's leftover heat. You climb slowly, emerging onto the flat roof where the air is cooler, touched with the faint breath of the night wind coming off the Nile. The sky above you is impossibly wide, a massive dome of velvet blue-black stretching from one horizon to the other. Stars glitter everywhere, scattered like grains of crushed quartz tossed across the heavens. You exhale without meaning to. No matter how many nights you've stood here, the view always steals something from your chest. Tonight the moon is brighter than the lamps below. It casts a gentle silver sheen over the village, outlining every rooftop, every clay pot, every coil of rope stored neatly against the walls. Your family has already arranged the sleeping mats, woven reeds covered with thin linen, positioned to catch the breeze. A jug of water rests beside them, cool to the touch, its surface beaded with night condensation. From somewhere across the rooftops you hear a baby fussing, then calming again. A donkey lets out a half-hearted bray, quickly silenced by its own exhaustion. A couple whispers faintly in a nearby courtyard, the tone soft, affectionate, private. The village is never entirely silent, but the night wraps everything in a warm, muffled hush. You sit on the edge of the roof, letting your legs dangle just a few inches over the side. The clay beneath you is still warm, but not unpleasantly so. The breeze brushes against your face, carrying hints of the river. Cool water, damp reeds, faint silt. You inhale deeply. It smells like the end of a day well lived. A mainstream historical fact drifts through your tired mind. Many Egyptians slept outdoors for most of the year, especially in rural areas. The roofs offered cool air, safety from insects, and a quiet place to dream beneath the gods' watchful stars. No paintings show it, no records describe it in detail, but archaeologists have found rooftop staircases and bedding materials in abundance. The evidence is subtle, but unmistakable. As you lie back onto your mat, staring up at the constellations, you think about the small superstitions that flavour village nights. Someone once told you that if a star streaks across the sky, it means a protective spirit is hurrying to deliver a message. You've never seen one yourself, but tonight, as you blink at the shimmering darkness, you find yourself quietly hoping. A quirky tidbit nudges your memory. Some villagers believed that sleeping under the open sky allowed dreams to travel farther, giving ancestors or gods a clearer path to send guidance. Whether true or not, you've always felt that dreams here are richer, warmer, deeper, more vivid. A faint crunch of footsteps pulls your attention sideways. A neighbour climbs onto their own rooftop, dragging a mat. They wave, you wave back, and without speaking, both of you settle into your places. There's something comforting about knowing others share this same quiet ritual, roof by roof, home by home, letting sleep slowly fold over the village. You close your eyes for a moment, then open them again, letting your gaze wander across the horizon. The last sliver of twilight is gone now, leaving only the pure, steady glow of the stars. A cluster of them, perhaps Orion, perhaps something else, seems to shimmer a little brighter, or perhaps your tired eyes are just softening. You pull your thin linen blanket over your legs. The night breeze lifts its corner, then settles again. Your body sinks into the mat with a heaviness that isn't unpleasant, just earned. The aches in your shoulders mellow. The dust on your skin no longer bothers you. Your mind drifts through the day. The lanes, the weaving workshop, the market, the musicians, the river, the stories, the laughter, the work. All of it blends together, one long ribbon of ordinary life that somehow feels extraordinary when seen up close. Beneath the vast Egyptian sky, you let your breath slow, your thoughts quiet, your limbs soften. The day has ended. The village dreams its ancient dreams, and so do you. The night deepens even further now, softening every outline, every sound, every thought. The warm clay beneath you cools with each passing moment, releasing the heat it carried all day, leaving only a gentle warmth that settles under your body like a quiet embrace. The breeze drifts more slowly now, moving across your skin in long unhurried strokes, as though the air itself is falling asleep. Above you, the stars brighten with that peculiar clarity that only comes when the world is still. They no longer look like distant fires. They look close, familiar, almost like they're watching over the rooftops with patient calm. The village lies beneath them in peaceful silence, its small roofs and narrow lanes resting in the moonlight's soft glow. Every worry, every task, every moment of tension from earlier in the day has dissolved into this vast, quiet dark. Your breathing slows without effort. Each inhale feels smoother, cooler. Each exhale carries away a bit of the day's weight. Your muscles loosen, long and slow, the ache fading into a pleasant heaviness. The thin linen over your legs rises and falls with your breath, sinking you gently with the rhythm of the night. Somewhere, a faint rustle stirs in the reeds by the river and then fades. A single dog shifts in its sleep. A night bird calls once, then melts back into stillness. Everything around you moves in soft, slow motions, the world resting but not empty, calm but not distant. You lie there, wrapped in the breeze, held by the quiet, breathing under a sky older than every story the village told today. There is nothing left to do, nothing left to fix, nothing left to carry, just rest, just peace, just sleep.